2, 1. I'll go ahead and let the room start to populate here. And there we go. Welcome everybody to this session from Basketball Embassy of a Virtual Coaches Clinic, and very honored and excited to have joining us today Coach Adam Tatalovich. Adam has worked really at all levels. He's coached at the NBA level, has also worked internationally, and been a part of the Serbian national team. So we're going to be talking about player development with limitations. I think this is an interesting topic. I know that we all have challenges that we probably face when it comes to developing our players, maybe with limited resources, limited facilities, and looking forward to seeing what Adam has for us. So Adam, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Again, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Appreciate you having me. Yeah, my name is Adam Tatalovich, and I have my experience. I was tied to the NBA for 11 seasons, and I've went across over to Australia, Europe, Asia, and as I've been watching, this basketball, summit for the last month or so, there's been so many excellent development coaches. I've pretty much watched, I think, 15, 20 in these last week. So great stuff. And I kind of said to myself, why don't we take a step back? Coaching internationally, the thing I've realized is in the NBA, you have so many resources. NBA, NCAA, high major, you're talking about so many staff members, multiple baskets, unlimited balls. When you travel the world like I have, you realize there's a lot of coaches that don't have the same resources. So some of the stuff that we're kind of learning, it's not as applicable. I kind of learned the hard way. I always tell myself I was spoiled. I started off in Chicago and New Orleans, and really good player development cultures. And like I said, it's you have so many resources to do. You have time, unlimited time, so many coaches, so many support staff. I just said to myself, when people are watching stuff online and they see multiple defenders, multiple balls, multiple baskets, it's not as applicable. And I try to get some details on what the audience was for this. And I realized there's over 28,000 people going online. So I kind of said to myself, there's been so many excellent guys from the NBA, international, Division I, Division II, III. I said to myself, why don't I take a step back? I'm probably going to be a little bit less technical than others, and kind of open up the mind for people to think, okay, how do you be creative given limitations? Like I said, I kind of, I learned the hard way. I went from the NBA to Australia, which was still pretty decent sized staff. And my first season, like I said, you had 2 or 3 assistants, and pre-practice, post-practice, it was a little bit different than what I was used to in the NBA, where you hear every NBA coach talk about player development culture. It's kind of a staple of development. You hear of the vitamin concept and so forth. And when you go overseas or you only have 1 or 2 coaches, it's kind of hard to implement like that. And like I said, a lot of what I've been doing is trial by fire. They're trying to figure out what works, what doesn't. And like I said, it's kind of helped pave me. But like I said, even when I was in Australia, I used to be involved with the youth game, and sometimes I would see some pretty high level youth, and you'd have 1 or 2 coaches with maybe 1 half court, maybe 1 full court for an hour. So I said to myself, how much can you really get done in an hour player development wise with such limited resources? So that's kind of what brought me to this topic. Like I said, I'm a little bit long-winded with more talking, and I have a little bit less visuals because I kind of want to just open up people's minds. I mean, like I said, if you go to YouTube, if you go to Inside This Coaches Clinic, you can get so many ideas for your resources. But like I said, we'll go for the first one. First topic, I kind of wanted to talk about was, I'm trying to accuse, is player development culture. And we head coaches and leaders and a lot of organizations talk about culture. I'm not really saying culture in the team concept. What I'm kind of more or less talking about is, what's the player development culture? Is it a priority? Is it a part of your foundation? Is it a part of your DNA? With that being said, I also think player development in terms of a culture for a middle school or a high school or Division I, sometimes coaches might just think, okay, player development, that it's guards bigs for 10 minutes in practice. I don't really think that's player development. I think that's just kind of a part of practice. I think player development is something that has to be stressed. You want to teach game concepts. You want to get game shots, but you also want to give players ownership of their game. So, I think about when I write here these words, priority, foundation, DNA. I think that's something you need to stress. I've seen some practices, traveling all over the world, college, international, pro, youth. I've seen some practices where it's 2 hours of almost like it's just 5-on-5. It's coaches putting in sets, zone defense, and sometimes I ask myself, I'm like, how much of this is actually player development? And I sometimes think at the younger levels, you have to kind of put a premium on that, and that's where I put this. If you're listening to this, you have to ask yourself, player development, getting players better. Is it a priority? Is it a foundation? Is it a part of your DNA? Head coach and assistant coach, has to ask yourself that. The other thing I'm going to kind of talk about, this is kind of a interesting topic, is I've been in some situations where, you might work for a head coach that's a little bit more old school. And as an assistant coach, you might be really gung-ho on player development and so forth. Sometimes you got to kind of create that energy and that, and that foundation yourself with your players. The head coach has a lot of stuff to do. He has media. He has other staff meetings. If you're in a school setting, he might be meeting with counselors, athletic directors, and the pro level, the general manager. At youth levels, you might be talking to parents. So a lot of times, it's up to the assistant coaches to kind of create the culture, for example, for the player development model of it. So that's why I kind of put this. I didn't put this in. Culture is an overused word right now. I feel, everybody's talking about it, but it's hard to create, especially when there's a lot of turnover every year. But when I say player development culture, for me, it's how you want to stress the player development portion of what you're doing. And, so which will go to my next topic. Give me a second while I get to this slide. So I put here preparation. Time is of the essence. So how much time do you have? You might only have 1 hour. You might only have 2 hours. The volleyball team might have the court for the time before. Baseball team might come on for training afterwards. The girls team might come on. So I kind of said time is of the essence. So, you got to plan wisely. I put here meetings. Most people think, okay, of course you have meetings, but I think the meeting portions, it's important. I mean, in the NBA setting, most people know when you're sitting down before practice, you're sitting down for over an hour. You're watching video. There's multiple input from coaches, video coordinators, interns. The head coach is leading the meeting. But I think the meeting stuff's important, even if it's at the youth level. You might have to have a Zoom call the night before. If you really got to get the percentages down. When I talk about the percentages, what portion of your practice do you want to be player development? I talked to a coach recently who went from college back to the prep level. And he talked about, instead of spending the 2 hours he had every day on X's and O's, he actually made it 50-50. He made 50% player development, 50%, X's and O's. I thought that was actually pretty interesting to hear that. And that's why I kind of said the same thing. The time is of the essence meeting. What percentage of your practice, do you want to devote to player development? In the NBA, I've listened to some great speakers the last couple of days, and, I lived through this for a number of years. A lot of times you're talking about having upwards of 2 hours before practice to work with these small groups. After practice, I've seen, I've been in gyms where some players are going for 45 minutes to an hour 15 after, just getting shot after shot, rep after rep. It doesn't always work that way. A lot of times you have time allotments, you have buses. This past year I coached in China. I lived in a hotel, and like I said, you pretty much had to get there. You got there 15 minutes before, and you had to get there, the bus was leaving afterwards. You have to make a decision, how do you work around those constraints? Can you get there before? It's easy in the NBA. Sometimes there's an early bus for a game, but sometimes if you're somebody else, you got to figure out a different way to make that work with that. So I also put here scripting with staff. What this means is you might have to have a walkthrough with your staff of how you want to do development. This past summer, I worked with Team Serbia, and we didn't have the biggest staff, and the coaches always wanted really good fluidity with the guards big. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time talking. So if I was working with another assistant or I had a strength coach or somebody helping, a lot of times I'm spending 5-10 minutes before I'm rehearsing. You see it a lot of times in the NBA while the team is stretching. You might start seeing, the coaches are grabbing the video guys and the player development guys, and they're kind of scripting. Okay, here's what we're going to do. And all that leads to, fluidity and flow for your teaching. I think that's important. And when a head coach is watching with what's going on, I think he wants to see less talk, more action. You need to be, both clear and concise, with your direction. So I think preparation's, the key. I think as long as you're having meetings, and there's probably, 1,000 people maybe listening to this on the other side of the screen that are saying, okay, I got one assistant. How much can I talk about? And it might even be, a drive over to the gym. Like I said, it might be a Zoom call. It might be a phone call the next day. But I think the better scripting you're going with what's going to happen is going to lead to better, fluidity and flow for your teaching. So that's, I'll go moving on from there. So. Okay, this is the big one. I put here time constraints, and this is the thing I've realized the most international. I put a lot of stuff here. I put practice time, pre-practice, practice, post-practice, additional gym time, creative concepts. Practice time for me, this does not apply to the NBA, because in NBA you have a plethora of time. You have these, I just mentioned it, sometimes you have a 2-hour player development time block before practice, and you have unlimited time after practice. So practice time for that is, in the college setting, a lot of times you only have 2 hours. At the high school level, a lot of times you have a team coming on, like I said before, you have a team coming on after. So within that practice time, how are you going to get player development in? I think that goes back to the planning portion of it all. Once you plan it right, you can put that percentage down. Next thing is pre-practice. Pre-practice for me, that's where, that's my actually probably most, outside of post-practice, I love the pre-practice development, and you have to figure out, what that entails. This past year I was in China. I didn't actually participate in all the pre-practice meetings. Sometimes I would go out early. I'm going to grab small groups. I'm going to grab, 2-3 guys, and I'm going to get, a good, some coaches talk about the vitamins, the supplements, so forth, but I'm going to put a player through his paces, and we might work on some new concepts with that. But how much time do you have? Some people might have 20 minutes. Some people might have 30. I've jotted some notes down on the side here. One thing, that takes up a lot of practice, especially at the high school and the college settings, is the warm-up time. Sometimes you could actually be up to, 10, 15 minutes warm-up. I think warm-up's just as important sometimes as a practice. You don't want anybody to get hurt, and there's some fabulous, coaches out there that put a lot of time. I tell people you need to be creative. I've been places where, I've seen a warm-up take place in hallways, in the weight room, where the minute the player steps out onto the court, that they can they're getting ready for, practice. And like I said, that kind of comes from the head coach. I've been a part of a lot of teams internationally when the minute the players step foot onto the court at 3 p.m. or 5 p.m., whatever time that is, they got the lather going, they're sweating, they're ready to go. So that's why, time constraints is important. How creative can you be to get the most out of that 1 hour block, that 2 hour block? And I think it's about being creative. And like I said, it kind of goes back to, like I said, the preparation aspect. Practice, I don't want to talk a lot about this because, like I said, every coach has what they want to do with how much of this concept needs to be, how much does a head coach want to give to player development? Is it 10%? Is it 15? Is it 20? And, you just have to figure out, maybe you can get more time before, maybe you can get time after. Talking about post-practice, this is probably my favorite time. Is I've been in some teams before where the head coach does, he does most of the heavy lifting during practice, teaching the tactics, teaching the details, and we're kind of assistant coaches, you're coaching on the fly. And sometimes I say, post-practice is assistants, time to shine. That's where you got to kind of create the energy. you got to grab the guys. And like I said, that's, a lot of development has to happen after practice. In the international game, I've realized, especially working with like a lot of the imports and players that have, you got to get that extra juice out of them at the end of practice. And, additional gym time. I put here creative concepts. I like some of the, corny collegiate things. And sometimes, it talks about, I put here Breakfast Club. I've been back when I was in high school, we used to make 100 threes and 100 free throws, in the morning before school started. Here, there was one time in a professional setting, we had a thing called night court. It was completely voluntary, but we'd have a time slot at night that if guys wanted to come in and get extra shots up, that there were coaches and support staff that were there. It might only be an hour. It might be from 9 to 10. You put 60 minutes up on the clock, and you kind of just go with it. But I think being creative with it can kind of help with the time constraints. But like I said, if you're a Division I or you're an NBA guy listening, this is probably not applicable. But if you're one of these coaches in Australia or Asia or South America, so forth, you probably have heavy time constraints. It's not only in time. I'm going to go to my next topic. Staff and support staff. Sometimes the head coach, he has so much stuff going on. How much staff is there to help? I've been places where there's only one assistant coach. My first year in Australia, I did a lot of the player development by myself. And what I would do is I was just creative. The head coach gave me complete ownership, and he said, whatever you think. So what I kind of created was, because I was by myself, is I said to myself, okay, what can I do that's applicable? I would basically grab 4 or 5 guys, and I would have, I had it set Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It was this 4 or 5 guys. And on Tuesday, Thursday, it was another different 5 guys. And I kind of try to create something that was a little bit more continuous and fluid that I could teach. The other important thing, and this is where, if you go back a couple of slides where I was talking about, management and scripting, some support staff. I think support staff's super important. In the NBA, you have a lot of player development. You have video guys, you have interns. You have so many multiple bodies on the court to help you. I've been in some pretty challenging situations where you have to get the assistant strength coach. This past year, in China, it's very limited resources, and I actually had to find an equipment manager to work with me every day as a rebounder. Now, like I said, these are the things you kind of got to figure out, and this is kind of I wrote down here, utilize everybody. You just need to figure out, how do you get to the point where you can have, fluidity and flow to your practice, utilizing everybody on the court. And like I said, there might be, I watched a lot of youth basketball when I was in Australia, 13, 14, 15-year-olds, and I'd see one coach, maybe 2 coaches. And I think at that point, you just got to figure out, there's a lot of pro coaches overseas that might only have 1 assistant. And that's difficult. It's difficult for a head coach to run the entire practice, and then early before practice, he's doing player development, and then post practice, he's, I call them finishers, he's doing finishing drills afterwards. So these are all things you need to sit and consider is, how do you get the most out of your time? How much staff do you have? Can you find a student manager? Can you find a video guy? Do you have an intern? Like I said, you got to be creative, especially internationally. Internationally, you got to get creative with how many guys do you have? You might have to use a doctor. Last year I wanted to give out a lot of Christmas presents to the support staff, hoping that, during the middle of the season, these guys could, help me out with rebounding, with 2 ball drills and so forth. So, that's just, kind of me going on a tangent, just about staff and support. A lot of these things I'm talking about, they kind of coincide with one another. So, a lot of it might sound, monotonous, but it all kind of ties back and forth. So I'm going to take us to our next slide. This one's pretty easy, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I have baskets, courts. Like I said, if you're in the NCAA or NBA level, you might have, 4 baskets, you might have 2 full courts. But if you have, I've seen places where, you have 1 bag of balls and you have 1 half court, and you got to figure out, how many players you have and how much time you have. A lot of us have probably done summer basketball camps, and I've done a lot, ran and directed a lot. You got to figure out, what do you have around you? What do you have to work with? Here I just put the basics, full court, half court, middle third. And, I was talking to a Division I coach this past week on the phone, and we were talking about, how do you utilize, the court and so forth. And he was telling me at certain points he has to have stations. I'm putting here on my mouse. A lot of times you have to use this middle third of the court. That might have to be passing and ball handling, while one side's working on footwork and finishing, and the other side's working on, precision shooting. So, like I said, these are things that have to go into the planning and preparation. How many baskets you have, how many courts you have. There were a couple of times I've done some clinics in the past where, I might have had 16 players and I had a half court. And, that's not, those of us that have a lot of resources around us that are listening and say, hey, this is pretty basic or elementary. But when you look around the world, there's a lot of people that, like I said, they only have a half court and they got more than 10, 12 kids. And, you got to learn how to be creative. The last thing here is creativity. And I wanted to spend less time showing drills in this segment and talking about just being creative. You could get on YouTube, you can get on Instagram, Twitter, and after this clinic's done, you're pretty much going to have thousands of clinics and excellent player development coaches giving all kinds of different ideas and concepts. But, baskets and courts, like I said, it's applicable. If there's 28,000 people, watching this international summit, I'd say more than half of them have limited baskets and, courts available. And not only that, basketballs, I've been places, you get 1 bag of balls, you have 12 players and you only have 8 basketballs. That's a limitation all of a sudden, and as a coach, you have to think about these things. How do you get the proper amount of, time and baskets on the court? So, but I want to move quickly off this and, here, number of players, I put here individual, we've all at the professional level had, great one-on-one sessions or small groups. My first start doing player development was working with Tim Grover, 15 years ago, and I never had more than 3 players. And when it's 3 players and you have a rebounder and you have some props, it's things go pretty easy. But like I said, the minute you start having more than 1 player, it's tough. Right? I'm going to skip one. I put small group. I put rule of 5. This past summer, like I said, I was working with Team Serbia, and we had 6 bigs. So I kind of made this thing rule of 5. And not nothing new, but I basically said to myself, if I have more than 5 guys, I have to have 2 lines. Otherwise, there's too many guys standing. There's too many guys standing and watching. And the other thing I realized is if you have 5, 6 guys in a line, you could add a secondary action to this. And, I'm going to show one drill here of one of my favorite drills, but you might have something simple. You might have a simple layup, but after the layup, the player grabs the ball, he passes it out to a coach or a strength coach, and he goes into a high hand closeout to a 2-step defensive slide. So it's all about being creative. And, like I said, when number of players is a limitation. You might have, I always say to myself, doing an individual, I would love to have 3 to 5 guys. It's perfect. But once you start adding more than 5 guys, it gets tough. And like I said, once you get to like 6, 7, 8 guys, and you're trying to do true development, you're just not trying to do drills to do drills. You have to be clear and concise in how you're teaching and how you're going forward with that. So I'm gonna move quick. But one of the examples of this, when I was in, I've been in Serbia the last few years, and I mean it's here. It's like I'm born in Indiana, so I like to think that I come from the heartland of basketball. And when you spend time here in Serbia, you see so many coaches from the youth level to the professional level have so many creative drills. And one here I'm going to pull up here is, I call it the Serbia drill. It's simple, but I drew it, and then I have one little example. But if you see right here and you're following me, you probably need more than 8 players on here. I put here 7, but just, for the drill's sake, just imagine this is a line. But what it is it's a continuous drill of every position has 2 actions. And as you're seeing here, the big, if you follow the big here, the big's going into a dribble handoff. I did not put the dribble because I wanted to make it clear, but imagine the big is starting with the basketball and there's a guard coming off to a dribble handoff. That big, as soon as he hands it off, he's going to flow right into a side pick and roll. And there's a guard already coming, and that guard's going to go, however the coach wants it. Maybe it's going to be a high hedge. Maybe he's going to get downhill. But for the drill's sake, I just have it going. The guard's turning the corner. He's throwing a bounce pass for a finish at the rim. And that same thing, that guard is going to continue now into the next big coming to dribble handoff. It might look a little confusing. I'm going to pop up a video here on time, but what it basically is so you got 2 lines. It's bigs and it's guards, and every play has every drill, and you can get creative. I've done it where I started the bigs low and I started the guards high. But I call this a Serbia drill because it's the first place I saw it, and you can get pretty creative with it because every single play there's a pass followed by a shot. So, I figure through a player development side, especially from, like I said, when you have multiple players on the court, you might have limited space. It's good because you're teaching passing, you're teaching screening, you're teaching, shooting at the end. And you can get pretty creative. I've seen this with 3 lines. It's kind of tough to teach off of video, so I wanted to keep the 3 lines out of it. But I'm going to pull this up here real quick, and hopefully from the angle you can kind of see where I'm going from. Okay, here, hopefully you're seeing what I call the Serbia drill. And I'm going to take the volume off here real quick. So right now, as you see, the guard, here we have the guard coming here, starting with the ball.
Coach, we don't see the video.
Okay, let me try to get this on here. Do you see it now?
Yes, now we see it.
All right. So the Serbia drill here, it's a bad angle, but as you can see, the guard's here. The big just threw the handoff. I'm going to let it play with some flow, but as you see, the guard's going to turn the corner. He's going to hit the big with a pass, and the guard's going to continue coming off of a handoff from another big. And as you see, it's a continuous motion. It doesn't have to be this. Like I said, you can start the 2 lines anywhere you want. From a player development angle, like I said, it's up to the coach, and you have to, whatever you're trying to teach. How are you trying to guard? What coverage are you talking about? Do you want the big? Do you want it to be a short roll finish? Do you want it to be a pop and a shot fake and an attack? I've seen it taught every way, but I just wanted to show this. This is more or less, this could be a great warm-up drill before practice to get a lot of shots and a lot of movement. Because basically everybody's dribbling, everybody's passing, and everybody's shooting basically. So I'm gonna let it play with some flow. I think it goes here for about 15 seconds, and hopefully you guys kind of get the angle of it. But the guard's coming off. It's a pull-up jump shot. The big's continuing. I'm going to play it one more time through just to watch a continuous action of it. So moving on from there, I thought this was good to show because, like I said, whether you have 8 guys, you have 12 guys, even if you have 16 guys, like you have those lines lined up, and you just kind of go from there. I'm gonna stop here real quick. I'm gonna go back to my slide. Are my slides back up?
Yes.
Okay. Next segment. I just wanted to put this. This is pretty simple, but depending on how many coaches you have, you might not have a lot to work with, so you might have to use props. Me personally, I'm not the biggest prop guy, but I do realize there is a time and there's a place for them. But as you know, you could get pretty creative. Everybody's worked with cones, everybody's worked with chairs, everybody's worked with pads, and there's so many creative things out there that you need to figure out what you can and can't work with. Here I put a video. There's a little picture of the silent player up there. Years ago, there was times I actually I used a screener, and I used there was a big that was basically the size of Yao Ming that you had to kind of finish over. So you're gonna get creative with it, and like I said, with especially if if you don't have a huge staff, you might have to use this past year in China, I was setting screens with a ball of baskets. Sometimes I'd have the guy I would tell a guard, I want you to snake the screen and pass out to the shake up in the corner. And basically I was using just a big rack of balls to set the screen. Not the most ideal thing, but sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, just being creative with it. So we all know props. Like I said, there's a million drills using props, but it's just another thing you got to take into consideration when you're doing your planning and your preparation. Are props needed? You might want to put a basketball in a chair, and a guy's coming off a wide pin down. Maybe there's not even a passer there. Maybe you have to have him taking it right off the chair, into a curl to a finish at the rim. So they're just trying to be creative. And like I said, my whole point of this presentation is just trying to tell coaches to think outside the box, because they're watching a lot of high level trainers and teams talk, you're watching these drills that have, like I said, multiple passers, defenders, dummy defenders, and you might not have all this to work with. So you got to be as creative as you can be. So moving on next to there. Now I put here routine. I'm kind of going, I'm going to kind of toggle back and forth some of my player development beliefs, but I always believe in like good routines. If you have, the thing I've realized the most with, the thing I've realized the most about having a routine when you have a limited staff is just how direct you have to be, and I think it needs to be stressed. This past year, I coached in, like I said, I coached in China, and good story. I'm going to, I was there last May, and I had me and one other individual help me on a daily basis, and I was trying to teach these guys as much as I could on a daily basis. And some of the things I was doing was, I didn't want to have to teach them everything, because I didn't want to be there before practice. I wanted to give them some ownership of their game. So I kind of have my own couple of staples, positional it might be, but when I talk about routine, I think sometimes routines do not have to be with coaches. I think there's ways that if coaches are in a meeting, maybe there's only two coaches and the coaches are me. I think there's ways that if your culture is strong enough, I think you can get to the point where the players are getting where they need to get to with a routine. I have a set things that I've kind of had over the years. A lot of times I like to start my drills with basic footwork. Ever since I was in high school, I've always, from my high school coach on, I've always loved the mic and footwork just to start, just to get the feet firing. As I've progressed through it, I've been with actually two coaches that kind of come from the Michigan State tree that have Brian Gregory and Scott Skiles, that they always talked about the daily dozen. And the daily dozen is pretty simple. At first it was just it was underhand, overhand, reverse, and floater, slide shot, and then sometimes you'd have a creative finish. I've kind of expanded that. My favorite two things to teach sometimes are footwork and finishing. I'm going to show an example of the daily dozen here, but the one I'm using actually only has one player. You can get concepts out of it, though. It doesn't always have to be one player. Sometimes it can be multiple. Sometimes I will have a player catching it off a shake-up off the inside pivot. Sometimes I will have a player catch it from the wing off of a flare. Sometimes I'll have a player stationary. The video I show is just going to show basically a player with the ball, and he's going to do 2 or 3 pound dribbles, and he's going to go into his finishes. But when I talk about routine, I think sometimes this, like I said, this does not have to be with a coach. If you get it to the right degree, I think players can know, hey, every day I need to do these 1, 2, or 3 things before the coaches get out there. And I think that all goes in hand with player development. If you can get it strong enough with limited resources, players can get some of it done on their own without a coach. Like I said, in the NBA setting, you have a lot of player development staffs that are 3, 4, or 5 deep, that they're always out there for the players. But you get to the point that, you go out there and you want to see guys working on stuff. And if there's no staff, sometimes players don't know, they need to be pulled along. But I think if you get it strong enough, what you need to be working on every day, you can kind of go from there. So I'm going to show a quick, I think it's about a 30-second, daily dozen routine. Is it showing the screen? I got to ask this.
Yes, we're seeing the video.
Okay, so this is pretty simple. At first I thought this was, I did this back when I was a graduate assistant, and then as I went into the pro game, I kind of went into it, and I really focused on finishing a lot. And I've expanded. The ones I put here, as you can see here, it's just a basic. You see with the player, it's just a couple drop dribbles. I'm gonna take the volume off here. Ideally, he'd be outside the 3-point line. That first one's just an underhand finish. Pretty basic. This is always the first one I'm having a player start with. Then I go in here, same thing. I'm just telling him to pound it 3 times with that outside hand. He's attacking it here, overhand finish. I'm having the player, the reason it's called the daily dozen, because it's basically, it's 6 finishes from the left, it's 6 from the right. We're here pretty much basic. I said 2 dribbles, long dribble and a drop dribble off the glass. Here, this is where I kind of I think every coach can do. I love to teach the up and under with different types of footwork. Here, when I was looking at this player, I told him to cross it over and attack the middle. So you see he crosses it over, he goes up, he goes under, he finishes off the glass. This one, he's just attacking middle to a basic spin. Last one, a lot of times when I'm working with players, I want them to have some ownership of their game. Here, I just told the player, I said, hey, I want you to be creative. Think of a finish, think of the footwork, get the mental rep in your head, and, let's drill it out. So this one, I told him just be creative with it. He went off the inside hand, did a little Euro step, the outside hand finish. There, I'll play this back through just so go, but here, underhand finish, overhand finish, going into the reverse. These 3 are pretty basic, as you can tell. And then you get a little bit more creative. Here we go to the middle, to the up and under. Here we go to the spin move. And that last one, I just told the player, be as creative as you can be. So stopping there, let me go back to my screen. I showed my player development, which takes me to this next one, pre-practice. This is the one thing that I really like to do with my players, whether it's a younger player or it's an older, more experienced player. I kind of made this up myself. It might sound a little corny, but I call it, ABCs, activation, base and balance, calibration. I put some examples on this, but basically what I want when a player walks in the gym, I hate to see players casual shoot. When I see a player just come in there and just dribbling around and just casting up shots from whether it's 3 feet, 5 feet, or, the worst is when I see a player walk into the gym and I just start seeing casting up threes. I always want my players to start with paint. Like I said, Mikan, I always have a player start with the Mikan drill, and then I kind of go on. But, I have it down. I pretty much want almost 50 made shots from – I almost want pretty much 50 made shots from inside the paint before I go outside the paint. So that's kind of where I am with the ABCs. I do this with all my players before practice. And when you talk about a kind of culture and player development, when I was last year in China over the summer when I was working with these players, I basically was saying, hey, let's give everybody a base, whether you're a guard or a big. Let's find this this daily routine or vitamin that you're going to do. And like I said, I got down there 15 minutes early, I'd see a lot of players down there. They had these ABCs in their mind and they were going through it. We had 4 baskets, so it was a little easier. You have 8 players spread out, 2 per basket. Maybe there's 3 per basket because there's more players out. And like I said, you're seeing them do the routine. So you're seeing activation, base and balance, and calibration. And I'll kind of go on. I'm going to stop this share. I'm going to go to these examples. Can you see this now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is pretty much basic. I think most coaches would know the Mikan drill, but I always start, when I get a player, I always tell them usually make 10 in a row Mikan. If I have numerous players, I might say make 4, give it to the next guy, make 4, give it to the next guy. But you'll see real quick, I'm going to go with some fluidity here. It's just going to go into a straight Mikan. I'm going to work my way to a reverse Mikan. It's pretty basic. I'm telling the guy to try to keep it high, keep it tight. Then I'm going to go into an awkward hand. You see the inside hand finish. So these are just kind of my activations. This is pretty basic. We all know what form shooting is, but a lot of times I'll say, I want 5 form shots. Just get right in the middle. Whatever you're aiming at, is it the back of the rim? Is it the front of the rim? I prefer the back, but I just want a player to feel good, see that ball going through the hoop. So he's making a couple just right there. Then I'm going to go back into butt down shooting. You see the players down here. I'm telling him to drop his rear down, get his stretch going. And just like I said, the same thing. I'm going to have him make probably 4 or 5 of these into that daily diet. And then we're going to progress from the butt downs. We're going to progress over to just some touch floaters. I just want him to get his touch, whether it's off the glass or it's just swishes. Then he's using his opposite hand. Here he's working on his left. Here, this is one of my favorite ones. I have him down into a deep lunge. And I like to teach an inside pivot like you're coming off of a screen. And I'm also telling him, focus on getting a good stretch. This is before practice. We're getting our routine in here. I'm just telling him lunges with the inside foot. He'll go both feet. Usually it's ×5. Here you're just going to see 2 quick ones. And then we're here, pretty much basic. This is a guard. I have him doing front pivots. If I'm doing a big, I might actually put him on the block just because it make it more game-like. This is a guard, so I'm just kind of working with him. Here, reverse pivot, as we can see. Here, these are kind of the single leg RDLs, but I'm having him pop that ball on the ground. He's coming up. He's just working on his balance. He's doing his now a little step back. This is more for the guards. Here it's a quick feet. I kind of have a guy hop to the left and then hop to the right. But I'm just going to play it straight. Now I want him to make 5 of these before he goes the other direction. Here I put calibrate distance. I do a lot of different drills. I just wanted to do one, but a lot of times once I got those 50 makes inside the paint, and I change it up sometimes. If I'm working with a player or a group of players, I sometimes will have, I'll change it up. But like I said, if it's the same player or he's not by himself, I might make it like a set diet. So, here you're seeing this player. He's just catching it. I'm telling him, make it, step back. If he misses, he has to go back to the starting point, obviously. But as here, he has a rebounder. The coach is just passing it out. But I want him to calibrate his shot. He's just going to make his way out. I want him to feel really good. See that ball going through the basket. Last one, we're going to see him make a three here. Like I said, if you miss, you're going back to that starting point. So I'm going to stop right there. Okay, moving on forward from that. So last one, I'm going to try to go a little quicker because I've been going pretty long. The last thing is your technology as a tool. I think, with where we are with technology, we're in definitely a visual generation. There's a lot of visual teaching you can do. I always talk about players having mental reps, and this is one thing I actually didn't talk about before. I always try to tell players when they're working in line that, if you're third or fourth in the line, get a mental rep in your head with what you're doing, what you're trying to do, and so forth. And like I said, I think that's important. Visual teaching. I'm like I said, I like to sometimes if I'm working with a player, I might try to find a finish we're going to work on that next day. It might be an NBA clip, it might be a EuroLeague clip, and I'm going to send that to him. Hey, here's our finish for the day. Let's work on this tomorrow. Maybe give him 1, 2, 3 examples. Maybe a quick 30-minute hit and kind of go from there. Like I said, I think that using technology as a tool is a powerful thing, and like I said, there's a lot we can learn with technology today, with Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, as I've already mentioned. There's so many things we could do with the share button. So I think using technology as a tool is important. I think a lot of us younger coaches are being as creative as we can be with this. So moving forward, my last thing is finishers. This is something I'd love to end practice with. I like to have players, at the end, I want them to feel really good. I'm going to fast forward here talking about self-fulfillment. When I have a player working, after practice, I want him to feel good about his game. I mean, whether he's had a good, bad, or indifferent practice, when he's off, I want him feeling, self-fulfilled. I want him to have some enjoyment from what he just did. So with finishers, this is what I call them is, I want it to be goal driven. I'm going to give a player some set target to work on. And, I'm going to talk about precision. I'm not going to tell a guy, make 5, make 10. I'm always going to say, make 3 in a row, make 5 in a row, make 10 in a row. There was times last summer with Team Serbia, we'd have every guy had to make 10 in a row from 5 spots before he left the court. So that might be tougher for from some younger levels, but, making it, precision and making it challenging, is important. I do not have a visual when it talks about finishers. I like to change it up. One of the ones I used the most this year in China, working a lot of times with our guards after practice, was, put it on here real quick. I put here finisher examples. I would tell one of my imports last year, like Marcus Georges Hunt, played both in the NBA and the G League before he went over to CBA. We had a drill at the end of every practice. It was, we just called it 7 Up. And it was pretty simple. I put, here pretty easy. There's 7 spots on the court, but basically he had to go all around the horn. he had to make from the first spot 1 in a row, second spot 2 in a row, and as you go 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That last spot's definitely the most toughest because he has to make 7 in a row before he gets off the court from that corner. You could change this. You can make this. More, more challenging. A lot of times I'll put a rule. If you miss 2 in a row, you go back to the spot you were at last at. So, you might have it rolling. You got 1 in a row, 2 in a row, 3 in a row, 4 in a row, and then all of a sudden, you miss 2 in a row. Back, boom, you go back to 3, and you just kind of keep going back and forth and so forth. So, like I said, I kind of call this a finisher. I want the player, like I said, to feel really good when he comes off the court. This is a pretty basic one. I have it. Sometimes I've had it where I might bring out, I may bring out a dice, and I may tell the player, roll the dice for every spot. If it's a 4, if it's a 5, it's a 6. That's how many you have to make in a row before you go to the next spot. But I like to be creative after practice. I like to create, the energy, for the player. But like I said, I want that player, no matter what, I want him to, the minute he crosses that line, I want him to feel good about himself. I think that's really important. Moving on. Energy and ownership. Really quick here. A lot of times I talk about, energy is a huge word for me, but I think as an assistant coach, you have to keep the energy up, especially like before practice or after practice. A lot of times I think you kind of got to set the tone for the players sometimes. I mean, you don't know, especially if you're in a school setting, you don't know what kind of day your players had. Maybe he had a lot of tests, maybe he has a problem going on at home. So I think a lot of times, as a coach, you have to provide the energy, especially after practice. A lot of times for me, I've been in some settings, I mentioned this earlier, that when you get to the end of practice, maybe it's lulling, maybe it's 5-on-5, maybe it's bad. Sometimes I kind of got to tell myself in my head, I say to myself, hey, you know what? I got to bring the energy. I got to bring the juice. Now is my time. So we might have had a tough 1.5 hour practice, and I'm sitting there telling myself, hey, it's time for PD. It's time. Let's get this gym popping and rocking. And like I said, I want my players feeling good. And I think that's our time as assistant coaches, to bring the energy, bring the juice, and we got to set the tone. Sometimes after practice, that's we got to kind of take ownership. And I think ownership goes both ways. I think as a coach, you got to take ownership of the environment you create. And back to the player, I think players want to have ownership of their game. Sometimes I will allow a player to dictate the development session. I may ask a player today, hey, what do you want to work on today? And it's funny, more often than not, a player doesn't even know what to tell. If you say, what do you want to work on? They sometimes, they don't even know what to say. They're looking at you. And I sometimes may say, hey, tomorrow I want you to come up with a drill for me. I may say, hey, do you want to work on side pick and roll, high pick and roll? Do you want to do multiple pick and roll with a pass that leads to a shot? But sometimes I like to see what a player can come up with, and it's creative. And a lot of times I'll do a 45-minute skill workout, maybe in the preseason with a player, and I'll do 30 minutes of normal coach stuff, game shots, skills, fundamentals, and that last 15 minutes I want to give the player ownership. Hey, what do you want to work on? And then that 15 minutes, that's his slot. What do you want to work on? Is it your step back? Is it your ISO game? As much as us coaches hate the ISO game, maybe a player wants to work on that. I'm going to give him ownership of that. And then, like I said, I'm always going to end it with what I was just talking about with finishers. I like to make something challenging at the end of practice that a player can keep building on. So going from there, I think that this is almost to the Q&A.
Yeah, Adam, let's start with a couple of questions here. I guess my first one would be, as a young coach, let's say you come into a situation where you're wanting to work with players, but there's also that you have to build kind of that credibility and that trust with the players. How would you suggest doing that if you're a young coach and you're coming into that situation and and kind of address that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been somewhat easy for me in some regards because I spent my earlier years in the NBA before I went overseas. So when you go overseas, and they know you worked at these higher levels, it kind of gives you an instant credibility. Um, those who've worked for me probably say I probably use the NBA word probably too much, which is kind of funny, but I'm kind of calling out my own fault. But you gotta draw to what you know on your knowledge base. I think showing video is important. But that, like I said, that sweat equity, getting to know your players. One thing I'm big on, this is big in the NBA. I know it's big internationally. When I was in Australia, I would go to our GM and I'd say, hey, can I take these guys out to lunch? Can I take these guys out to dinner? And that's big. I think getting to know guys off the court, knowing that, every player wants to get better. A high school player wants to start. A starting player wants to get to that college scholarship. The guy with the college scholarship wants to, he wants to maybe eventually play in the pros. And when you're in the pros, guys want to move up levels. They want to make more money. So I always try to sit with guys, whether they're a domestic player, they're an import. I want players to know that I care about them, and I have a knowledge base. How to get better. I've been in the CBA the last 2 seasons, and every import I've worked with has been in the NBA. So I know a lot of these guys want to get back. And like I said, I sit with them. I say, hey, I might have failed you as a coach if we don't get you back to the league. It's plain and simple. So like I said, when I put that on my shoulders before practice and after practice, I'm tied to that player. I want him to get better. I want him to get a better contract that next year. I want him to better his his life, his family's life, and his future earnings. So I think players knowing and trusting you and spending time with them off the court, however way, maybe it's going to dinner, maybe it's going to a movie, maybe it's just doing small group sessions with guys. But the more time you spend talking, engaging with players and having good relationships with them, getting to know them, their families and so forth, that's sometimes the most important stuff when it comes to creating that relationship, and that relationship leads to the culture. Like I said, I'm pretty straight up with my players. I don't think I'm combative, but like I said, I can call out a player. I can show them video of something I didn't like or something I liked, and like I said, I think that makes relationships stronger. And like I said, I think if you can be straight up with a player, and most important thing, you hear a lot of great leaders and great coaches talk about the truth. You got to be able to tell a player, look them in the eyes and tell them the truth. And I think when a player sees you genuinely care about him, he's gonna give you his attention, his 100%.
So along the same lines with those young coaches, you mentioned working with Tim Grover earlier. And there's a lot of names out there in the player development world, so to speak. What coaches or people would you recommend that a young coach maybe get to study or try to spend some time with to improve their player development skills and just their ability to teach, things of that nature?
That's a tricky question for me. I really truly respect I respect everybody out there in their craft. There's some great coaches. There's some coaches I actually never heard of that I've watched in these last 3 months, and I said, wow, that guy's pretty good. I really don't want to call out names, because I feel like if I call out a name, I might be disrespecting another name. I had it in the NBA. I spent years with. I got my start through video, worked my way up through player development, then I actually shifted over to personnel scouting, and it was fun. The 2 years or 3 years I did personnel scouting, I would be before the game, I'd be out there and I'd be watching every NBA team before, and I was watching all kinds of development coaches work their craft. And as you know, there's so many guys that are on Instagram and they're on YouTube, and I think everybody kind of has a different bag, and everybody has a different skill set. I'm a little bit more old school. I think I want to do game shots. I don't try to get too technical with footwork off the dribble. So a lot of times I tell players, get to be who you are, get to where you need to get to. That's not really for me to kind of tell a guy how he's going to get there. But when it gets to finishing, but there's so many good coaches to watch. I just say, what I say is, get out there, get on YouTube, get on Instagram, watch your coaching clinics. But also just applying it. We're all in a certain city, whether we're in Europe, Asia. Get out there, watch people. I've been fortunate. I'm sitting here in Belgrade, and we've all went through these quarantine times, and before we hit these times, I sometimes will call some random player that I'm friends with, and I'll say, hey, who's a good youth coach that I can go watch? And I might actually just go sit in a gym and go watch a youth coach. And sometimes these coaches are looking at me like, why does this guy want to come watch? And I think we're all lifelong learners, and I'm probably not giving you the answer you wanna hear with that, but I think all these player development coaches are great. They're whether they're Division I but ultimately, I think every coach is a player development coach. I sometimes don't like that label. I think obviously every player development coach in the NBA is a coach first and foremost. He just might be a little bit more focused on the individual aspect. I've been with some staffs early on when I was with Chicago and I was working under Scott Skiles. I was a video coordinator, and I was doing the pregame workouts for some of the starting players. So, like I said, watch guys that you think are applicable to how you teach. I can't. There's some guys that can guard a pick and roll. I can't. I'm not one of these. I'm a 6'3" unathletic guy that played 2 years NAIA, so I can't really I can't go out there and guard the pick and roll for 2 or 3 dribbles. I kind of know who I am, so it's just knowing who you are and knowing what's applicable. I'm probably not the best showing an example. I might be better showing video or going slow motion, or I might walk a player through what I want them to see as I'm doing it. So I think you got to look at who you are as a coach and see how whoever you're watching, how does that apply to who you are and how you can get that off them.
You mentioned, right now being in Serbia and spending time with some of the youth coaches and the clubs there. What can we learn from the club systems that you've been around overseas that would be applicable here, let's say in the United States for youth coaches, for middle school coaches, and for high school coaches?
Honestly, what I would say, there's fabulous coaches all over the world. There really is. Serbia has really strong reputation. I mean, unbelievable. I mean, I grew up and I was born in Indiana, so I mean, I guess I have Serbian roots, so I didn't come up under the Serbian school of basketball, but I've been fortunate and blessed to be around some really great former Serbian players that I ask a lot of questions. I want to know how people learn, but growing up in Indiana, I was lucky because there's so many. My high school coach actually he spent his time under Morgan Wooten, so I was very lucky in that regard. To have a high school coach who worked under Morgan Wooten, like that was my 4 years of high school were kind of created the base. And it's funny, I'm showing drills. The first drill, my coach, his name was Keith Hipskin. The first drill he used to tell us to do before we got on the court was the miking drill. And still here I am, 20 years later, I'm still starting a pro workout with, it's not just the mic, and now it's the mic, and it's the reverse mic, and it's the, So when I say get out of your house, there might be a good D2 or a D3 or NAIA coach. There might be an excellent, women's program that might be around the corner from you. There might be a junior college. I just say, get out of your house, see where you are, and see what you have access to. If you're in a country that doesn't have the same resources, you might just have to, go look up some good books. Back, like I said, I remember some great books I used to write. I remember the famous John Wooden book. I think it's called Practical Modern Basketball. I remember reading that. I remember, I went to Indiana University. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to learn from Coach Knight, but I remember I read, he had all these books and videos. I was eating up stuff as I was a student manager trying to, I wanted to learn as much as I can about the game. So I'm here in Serbia, and like I said, for those people who are not in Serbia, you can't just walk into a random gym. So what I challenge people to do is, get out of your house and just go watch a good program. You might go watch a youth coach in a program that's like 20 minutes from your house, but we have so much options to see who's good at our craft. And like I said, you go spend an hour watching something, you might see one drill that you carry on somewhere else. And I'm showing some of these activation drills that I showed earlier here. I actually got these activation drills. I watched one NBA coach that came from a foreign background. He was doing these, and then I actually came to Serbia a year later, and I saw a different coach doing some similar drills, and all of a sudden that kind of became a part of my bag, you know. And we're always, you know, we're always sharing the game and learning the game. So, you know, to answer that, like I said, I just tell coaches, see who's around you, you know, see who's at your disposal. Most coaches have an open door policy in terms of like coming in and watching a practice, or, you know, if you're lucky, maybe you can grab a guy for, you know, for a quick coffee or something like that. I've been, you know, utilizing. I'm probably borderline annoying right now. I've had so much time here in Serbia. I'm trying to have you know, 2 or 3 coffees a day with all these coaches around me.
No, that's great. That's great advice, Adam. And I would, you know, I could certainly say from personal experience as well that you do find that, and especially now that you know, where we're at now as a community, a basketball community, as a coaching community, you know, we're all looking to help and help each other. You know, no matter what our title is, where we coach, who we coach, it's all about helping each other. So, Adam, I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule and joining us and sharing with us today. I thank you so much for doing this. And if anybody had any questions or wanted to additional questions or wanted to reach out to you personally, what would be the best way to do that?
Honestly, I'm pretty open door. You could just go to my if you go to my full name and my full name, Adam Tatalovich at outlook.com. I'm pretty open. You know, I did a FIBA clinic a couple years ago. I gave out my emails. Some coaches thought I was crazy, but I love sharing the game. And like I said, hopefully I can, you know, hopefully I don't get 100, but if I get a few emails, I'm always quick to respond to stuff. And like I said, you know, feel free to reach out. And, you know, I always tell coaches, you know, don't be scared to tap somebody on the shoulder if you're at a coaching clinic or so forth. And like I said, we're always trying to learn, and, you know, half this coaching is, you know, we're sharing, we're stealing drills, and like I said, that's the beauty of it, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and end the session here so we can prepare for our final sessions that are coming up here in about an hour. So, coaches, thank you for joining us, and I look forward to connecting with each one of you at a later date.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Adam. Take care.